Welcome to our one-on-one video program, a three-part series brought to you by IQVIA. It's all about the patients, how access is disrupted. I'm here today with Niyogi, Principal Market Access Center of Excellence at IQVIA. And we're going to talk about how buy and bill dynamics shape stakeholder decisions and patient access. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Taryn. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Who are the stakeholders involved with a buy and bill system? And then as a follow-on, what access roles do they play?
Yeah, so providers are definitely the key stakeholders from a buy and bill standpoint. In a buy and bill system, they stock, administer, and recommend different therapies for their patients. They play a role in access by determining what the best course of treatment is for the patient, which is obviously informed by clinical aspects and the condition of the patient itself, but also based on the patient's individual situation and their insurance coverage. Payers are also another critical component. Obviously, they set the benefit design, which includes any cost sharing and prior authorization requirements that is based on the plan that the patient's enrolled in. And then, of course, the most important stakeholders in our healthcare ecosystem are patients, but oftentimes they have the least real information and influence when it comes to access and treatment decisions.
That is so true. And what makes buy and bill dynamics an important consideration for market access?
Yeah, it's a really important consideration. If you look at just the way that the industry is shifting and you look at the pipelines of a lot of manufacturers in the space, there's a huge shift from sort of traditional chemical pharmacy medications to more oncology and rare disease biologics, which are more complex molecules. And oftentimes, more often than not, they require providers to directly administer the drug to the patient. What that means is it's important to really understand the distinction between what happens in that scenario where a provider has to go through buy and bill and administer the drug directly to the patient versus the traditional pharmacy channel. There's differences from a buy and bill standpoint in how the acquisition coverage and cost dynamics work. So that's a really important consideration for manufacturers. Very simply, with buy and bill products, they aren't subjected to the same levels of formulary controls that more traditional medications are exposed to because they go through specialty pharmacies, but can be impacted by the ways that cost and reimbursement to the provider play a role in decision making. So in that way, providers not only play a clinical role, but they also play a market access role in these buy and bill systems, which you don't see to the same extent with more pharmacy-oriented medications.
And how do you make that connection between buy and bill and patient access then? So how do you bridge that?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a interesting question that we're getting from a lot of clients, and I think what we're seeing is that a lot of the traditional assumptions that we see in the industry, particularly a lot of lessons that are learned from the pharmacy space, they don't always hold true in a buy and bill system. So, one example is that there's an assumption that, high volume prescribers, maybe within a particular territory, should always be considered as high value targets when we're maybe launching into that particular therapeutic area. Yet the reality is that maybe only a portion of those providers may have the ability or the willingness to participate in buy and bill. Beyond that, there's a subset of providers within that may only have the capability and the resources to buy and bill more innovative and higher cost medications, because that does put the onus of the acquisition on the provider and the ecosystem that they're in. So that's also another challenge, right? Where you have not just providers that need the capability, but also the ability to administer some of these more higher cost medications. That isn't to say strategically brands should only focus on buy and bill providers. Their circumstances are just completely different. And for providers with limited buy and bill capabilities, there's a further need to understand sort of the other factors such as their referral patterns or more detail around the local networks or health systems that they're affiliated with. Another assumption is that, patient access is about formulary coverage all the time, but admittedly, the buy and bill space is different. You don't see as much of the NDC blocks and restrictions that you see in the pharmacy space. Instead, you may see patients who are actually exposed to more cost sharing up front with less patient support options, and also more prior auths that can really take a lot of time for a patient to clear on the buy and bill side. And so this can have major disruptions to the patient journey, and again, puts the provider in a critical role from a patient treatment standpoint.
And say, how might these dynamics change? And how is this then going to impact the industry? What are we looking forward to?
Yeah, there's always a great deal of uncertainty, as we all know, with the healthcare industry. One of which is around reimbursement policy, which lawmakers, local and federal politicians, government agencies continue to debate publicly, especially now that we've just passed an election year and we have another big election year coming up next year. The nuances of reimbursement by insurer or program are very complex. And so the slightest tweak in a policy can actually have lasting implications for a particular provider or a particular brand as well. So that's a really important consideration for manufacturers to continue really monitoring what's happening from a policy standpoint. To that end, the healthcare system as well is as a whole consolidating, which means continuous change in hospitals and clinics and their corresponding footprints, as well as the level of influence they have. There's continuing to be a reduction in the number of independent physicians as more and more providers are becoming affiliated with these larger health systems. There's also a growing pressure in many cases to move coverage for some of these therapeutics that are more on the biologic sides from a buy and bill to a pharmacy model where there's white bagging going on, where the provider still administers the treatment, but it goes through the patient's pharmacy benefit. And that's going to be important to continue understanding as payers also continue to consolidate and try to get more and more control of the pharmacy market. So as a result, as more treatments consider launch in the coming years, there's even a greater need to continuously monitor and understand provider buy and bill capabilities and the potential changes in their capabilities as our healthcare ecosystem evolves.
Well, thank you so much for explaining the complexities of a buy and bill and how the dynamics are going to shape the future in terms of stakeholder access from patients and prescriber perspectives. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.